Thomas Winterton finally revealed the truth about the near-fatal incident that almost ended his time on Skinwalker Ranch forever. And what he admitted is far more disturbing than anything the show has ever aired: long-buried secrets, medical anomalies, and a hidden event the crew was ordered never to discuss. Until now, what Winterton says nearly killed him changes everything we thought we understood about the ranch. Before we break down the full story, make sure you subscribe, because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning what's really happening beneath that ground. It started on a morning so ordinary that nothing about it should have been memorable, except that Thomas Winterton would later say he woke up with an uneasy heaviness behind his eyes, like pressure building before a storm. He shook it off, drove to the ranch, and stepped out into air that felt colder than it should have been. The sky was low, gray, and silent. Even the birds were quiet. That silence would make sense hours later. But at the time, Thomas took it as nothing more than another strange morning on the most unpredictable property in America. He met the crew near the West Access Road, clipboard tucked under his arm, as he reviewed the plans for that day's excavation. The sensors placed overnight had been picking up odd readings, low-frequency vibrations registering deep beneath the ground. Eric had flagged it. Travis wanted more scans, and Caleb joked nervously that the equipment must have been glitching again. But Winterton didn't laugh. The readings weren't random. They repeated in a rhythmic interval, like a pulse. Still, he pushed forward. The team began clearing soil from the edge of the dig, while Thomas moved closer to inspect the ground level. He crouched down, checking the displacement patterns, and noticed something that wasn't there the day before: a faint circular discoloration on the dirt, perfectly round, too perfect to be natural. He brushed his hand near it, but before he could touch the surface, the earth beneath his boot made a sound that froze him in place. A metallic pop. Not a crack, not a shift. A pop, as if something flexed under pressure. Thomas stepped back instinctively, but the next moment hit him before he even realized he was moving. A sudden burst of pressure slammed into the side of his skull, silent, invisible, and violent. His vision went white. An electric sting ripped across the top of his head, followed by a crushing pain that sent him staggering. He dropped to one knee, gripping the dirt as his ears filled with a deep, static roar. Caleb shouted his name. Eric ran toward him, but Thomas couldn't hear any of it. The pain wasn't outside his body. It was inside, as if something was expanding beneath his skin, pushing upward, threatening to split him open. Within seconds, the right side of his scalp ballooned outward in a grotesque swelling. The crew watched in horror as the lump grew, pulsing unnaturally like it had a heartbeat of its own. Thomas Winterton didn't know it yet, but this wasn't an injury. This was a reaction. Something under the ranch wasn't just warning them, it had reached for him specifically. By the time they got Thomas to the utility building, the swelling had doubled in size. It sat on the right side of his skull, angry, tight, and rising under the skin like something was trying to push its way out. Even seasoned emergency personnel struggled to hide their panic. This wasn't the type of injury that came from impact. It wasn't a bruise. It wasn't a reaction to heat or altitude. It looked engineered. Thomas sat in the chair with his head tilted, breathing slow and shallow. He wasn't fully aware of what was happening. His thoughts came in flashes, patches of light, muffled voices, and a ringing in his ears that wouldn't stop. The crew hovered nearby, forcing themselves to stay calm, trying to talk to him gently. But Winterton wasn't responding normally. Every few seconds he'd flinch, like a shockwave hit him from inside his skull. The on-site medic pressed a cold pack against the swelling, but the moment it touched his skin, Thomas jerked away with a gasp. "It burns," he whispered, his voice thin. But the medic wasn't touching him with heat. He was touching him with ice. The contradiction rattled everyone in the room. Then the equipment started reacting. The RF meters on the table, devices that had been off, lit up by themselves, spiking into red zones. A handheld spectrum analyzer flickered to life, cycling through frequencies no one recognized. Travis rushed into the room as alarms began chirping, each one reacting to something invisible in the air around Thomas. "Back away from him," Travis warned sharply. The medic hesitated. "He needs treatment. He needs space," Travis shot back. "Something's interfering." As the medic stepped back, something strange happened. The swelling stopped growing, not decreased, not softened, just paused. Travis stared at the readings, then at Thomas. The frequencies were pulsing, rising and falling, in the same exact rhythm as Winterton's heartbeat. It was as if his body was syncing with a signal no one could see. Then Thomas suddenly lifted his head. His eyes were unfocused, pupils dilated, staring at something none of them could see. "It's pressure," he murmured, "like something is pushing down from above." The words made no sense, until an antenna outside the building bent slightly, as if something heavy pressed against the top of it. Eric and Caleb looked at each other in shock. This wasn't environmental. This wasn't medical. This was a targeted event. Something had chosen Thomas Winterton, and whatever hit him was still lingering in the room, invisible and intelligent. The medic whispered the words nobody wanted to hear. Whatever happened to him didn't come from this world. Thomas was released from urgent care with no answers, no concussion, no hematoma, no trauma consistent with the swelling that had nearly crushed the right side of his skull. The doctors were baffled. They'd never seen tissue react that way without any physical cause. They suggested rest, ice, and monitoring. But Thomas knew in his gut that rest wouldn't fix what had happened. Whatever struck him on the ranch wasn't done with him. His wife drove him home slowly through the Utah desert, the sunset blurring into streaks of red and gold. Thomas leaned his head against the window, wincing at every bump in the road. The pain had dulled, but the pressure, the deep internal pushing, hadn't gone away. It felt like fingers pressing from the inside, searching, probing. That night, everything got worse. Winterton woke up around 2 a.m., heart pounding, drenched in cold sweat. His room was pitch dark, but he had the sense that something was standing inches from his bed, watching him breathe. He tried to sit up, but a crushing pressure slammed onto his chest, pinning him down. He gasped for air, barely able to move. His wife stirred beside him. "Thomas, you okay?" The pressure vanished instantly, like a switch flipping off. He sat upright, shaking, struggling to catch his breath. "Something's wrong," he whispered. "Something followed me home." The next day, while resting in the living room, the electronics began malfunctioning. First the TV, then the Wi-Fi router, then the baby monitor. The devices hissed and crackled with static, cycling through channels and frequencies on their own. One moment, the baby monitor showed his toddler sleeping peacefully. The next, it displayed nothing but swirling interference, as if something was passing in front of the camera. But the worst moment happened that evening. Thomas stepped outside for fresh air. The sun was low, painting the sky orange. He leaned on the porch railing, breathing slowly. Then he heard footsteps behind him, heavy, deliberate, dragging. He turned around, expecting to see one of his kids or his wife. The porch was empty, but the footsteps didn't stop. They circled him, just out of sight, pressing the air inward, making it vibrate with an electric hum. His skin prickled. His ears rang. The same invisible force that crushed his skull was now walking around him, closing in. He backed up toward the doorway, terrified. "Stay away from my family," he whispered, not even sure who or what he was talking to. And then everything went still, silent, until the wooden boards of the porch creaked, slowly, as if something enormous stepped directly onto them. Thomas froze. It had followed him home, and now it didn't want to leave. For the next few days, Thomas tried to convince himself that stress and fear were exaggerating everything, but the house refused to let the illusion hold. Every night, the same pattern repeated: flickering lights, shadowy movement in places no shadows should exist, and that oppressive sense of being watched from inches away. His family felt it too, though they didn't know how to describe it. His youngest child began waking up crying, pointing toward the ceiling corner of the room as if something tall and silent stood there. By the fourth night, something crossed the threshold. It started with the sound of dragging footsteps moving down the hallway. Slow, rhythmic, heavy. Thomas bolted upright in bed. His wife stirred beside him, but didn't wake. The footsteps came closer, stopping just outside the door. The air in the room thickened like syrup, pressing against Thomas's ears until they popped. A low vibration hummed through the floorboards, rising like an engine revving in reverse. Then the door creaked open. No one stood there, but the doorway distorted just slightly, like the air was bending around an invisible mass stepping through. The temperature dropped 10 degrees instantly. Thomas could see his breath in the darkness. He reached for the bedside lamp. The moment his fingers touched the switch, the bulb exploded with a pop, showering devouring the nightstand in glass shards. Thomas shielded his eyes, heart hammering in his chest. Everything plunged into darkness. That's when the pressure struck again. But not on his head this time. It hit his ribs, winding him, pushing him sideways on the bed like a physical shove. He gasped and grabbed the frame, trying to pull himself upright. His wife finally woke, confused, asking what was happening. But the moment she spoke, the entity retreated. The pressure lifted. The air warmed. The sense of presence dissolved like smoke fading into the night. But the house still hummed. Thomas scrambled out of bed, adrenaline surging, and checked the hallway. Nothing, just darkness. The air smelled faintly metallic, as if lightning had struck somewhere close. Downstairs, something clicked, an electrical surge. Then the kitchen lights turned on by themselves, glowing with a dim yellow pulse. Thomas stepped toward the stairs. Halfway down, he froze. Standing in the kitchen doorway was a silhouette, tall, impossibly thin, shaped like a human but lacking any human softness. Its outline flickered, as though struggling to hold form in this reality. Thomas's breath caught in his throat, and then, without stepping, without turning, it simply folded out of sight, like someone closing a curtain. The house fell silent again. Thomas clutched the railing, shaking. Whatever attacked him on the ranch wasn't trapped there anymore. It could follow him. It could enter his home. And now it knew exactly where he slept. By the time morning came, Thomas looked like he hadn't slept in a month. Dark circles ringed his eyes, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. His wife insisted he go to the hospital. Not one near the ranch, but a larger facility hours away, where no one had heard of skinwalker effects or radiation hotspots. At first, the doctors assumed exhaustion or stress, but that changed the moment they ran imaging scans. The technician reviewing the screens froze. Thomas watched her expression shift from confusion to concern to something close to fear. She excused herself and brought in a second technician, then a third. None of them would explain what they were seeing. When Thomas finally demanded answers, the lead doctor spoke carefully, as if each word carried weight. Your soft tissue shows signs of severe trauma, but there's no external injury, no bruising, no impact marks. It's as if the compression happened from the inside. Thomas felt his stomach drop. That was exactly what he had experienced. The invisible weight crushing down on him, the pressure inside his skull, the force that pushed him across the bed. The doctor continued flipping through the scans, and this part, we can't account for this at all. He pointed to a patch near Thomas's spine, cells that appeared hyper-stimulated, glowing faintly in the imaging like they were electrically charged. Thomas whispered, "Is it dangerous?" The doctor hesitated. "We've never seen anything like it. Whatever caused this isn't medically normal." The hospital wanted to keep him for observation, but by afternoon, men Thomas didn't recognize arrived. Quiet, suited, speaking in clipped tones, they asked to review his tests. They asked him what he remembered. They asked him to sign papers. Thomas refused. Within an hour, the hospital discharged him early. No explanation, no follow-up, just a quiet pressure to leave. As Thomas walked out of the building, his phone buzzed with a message from Brandon Fugel. "Don't talk to anyone until we meet. This is bigger than you think." Thomas stared at the message, his pulse pounding. Whatever was happening to his body wasn't just a medical anomaly. Someone knew what caused it, and someone wanted him silent. Thomas didn't want to go back. Every instinct told him the ranch had done something to him, changed something inside him. But avoiding it only made the fear worse. So 2 days after the hospital released him under strange circumstances, he drove back through the gates of Skinwalker Ranch with a knot in his chest and a pounding headache he couldn't shake. The moment he stepped onto the property, the air felt wrong, heavy, electric, like the atmosphere itself recognized him. Travis Taylor and Eric Bard rushed over the second they saw him, relieved but visibly tense. "You shouldn't be here yet," Travis said quietly, "not after what happened to your head." But Thomas just shook his head. "I need answers." They walked him toward the command center, and the closer he got, the worse the pressure inside his skull became. A low ringing started behind his ears, then a pulsing sensation in his neck. Thomas stopped and held onto a railing, gasping. "It's happening again," Eric muttered, panic creeping into his voice. And then, equipment across the yard began to react. The magnetometers spiked violently. Surveillance cameras tilted toward Thomas as if pulled by an unseen force. Laptops flickered, screens flashing with static. Even the ground-penetrating radar in the shed powered on by itself, emitting a high-pitched whine. Travis stared at Thomas like he'd become part of the phenomenon. "Whatever affected you, it's still connected to you," he whispered. The pressure in Thomas's head intensified. The sky above him seemed to warp, bending the sunlight in subtle, unnatural waves. Shadows on the ground shifted slightly out of sync, like reality itself was glitching around him. And then he felt it. A presence behind him. Not a sound, not a movement. A presence, cold and aware. Thomas spun around, but nothing was there. Not physically. Yet the sensation remained. Watching, waiting, tracking his heartbeat. Travis grabbed his shoulder. "Thomas, your return triggered something." Thomas swallowed hard, his vision blurring for a moment. "No," he said quietly. "It wasn't triggered. It was waiting." Later that evening, once Thomas stabilized enough to speak, the team gathered in the command center to review the surveillance feeds from the exact moment he stepped onto the ranch. Eric cued the footage, his hands trembling just enough for Thomas to notice. At first, everything looked normal. Security cameras tracking the front gate, the weather station readings flickering across the corner of the screen. But then, the moment Thomas appeared on camera, every feed glitched simultaneously. The footage warped, colors inverted, and a violent static pulse surged across all monitors. "Rewind that," Travis said, leaning in. Eric slowed the playback. Thomas watched the footage of himself walking through the gate, except something else appeared just behind him. A distortion, a silhouette made of bending light. It clung to the edge of his shadow like it was tethered to him, like it had followed him back from wherever the pressure in his skull had dragged him that night. "What is that?" Thomas whispered. Eric zoomed in. Reluctantly, the outline sharpened just enough to reveal something unmistakable. 2 points of radiant heat, like eyes, locked directly onto Thomas, even though the figure had no visible face. Travis muttered, "That isn't human." The distortion flickered, then vanished entirely as the footage corrupted. Thomas's stomach dropped. Whatever nearly killed him hadn't just attacked him. It had attached itself to him, and the ranch cameras had caught it, only for the system to immediately try to erase the evidence. Before Thomas could react, an alert chimed across the screens. Motion detected. Same location, same distortion pattern. It was back, watching the command center, watching him. Before anyone could react to the motion alert, the screens flickered again. The same distortion, shifting, bending, almost liquid, moved across the northwest camera. It didn't walk. It glided, as if gravity didn't apply. Travis leaned closer, whispering, "It's tracking a path, straight toward the command center." A cold wind swept through the room, even though every door was sealed. Thomas felt pressure build in the side of his head again, sharp, needling, the same sensation from the night he collapsed. He staggered back, clutching the wall. The cameras glitched harder. Then the distortion stopped. Right outside the building, every monitor went black at the same moment. Not powered off, overridden. The team froze, listening as the lights buzzed overhead. The air carried a faint vibration, like a distant engine or something breathing through the walls. "Whatever this is," Eric whispered, "it knows we're watching it." Suddenly, a single camera feed returned. Not outside, inside. A warped image of the command center itself appeared, but something was wrong. The angle was impossible, like the camera was positioned inches above their heads, looking down on them. And in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was the shimmering outline again, watching silently. Thomas felt his head pulse violently, and he collapsed to his knees. Travis rushed to him, but Thomas raised a shaking hand. "Don't touch me," he gasped. "It reacts when you get close." The monitors began flashing symbols, jagged geometric shapes, mirroring the patterns found burned into the soil months earlier. The entity wasn't attacking this time. It was communicating, and it was using Thomas as the conduit. When the screens finally died again, the pressure in Thomas's skull vanished instantly. He stood, trembling, drenched in sweat. The others stared at him, waiting for an explanation, but he only shook his head. Later, during a private interview filmed for documentation, Thomas finally said the words he had avoided since the incident. "Didn't try to kill me," he whispered. "It tried to mark me." He looked off camera, eyes unfocused, and whatever that thing is, it's not done with me, not even close. The recording ends there, with Thomas Winterton staring into the darkness behind the camera like something was standing in the room with him, something only he could see.